Good morning and welcome to Africa Good Morning on this Wednesday morning of the 4th of May. I am Aina Raisa Koyo alongside Ashwan Berry.
It is a good morning indeed. However, we are of course commemorating Kasinga Day. Kasinga Day is a national public holiday in Namibia remembering the Kasinga massacre. Commemorated annually on 4 May, the date remembers those who lost their lives on this day. Here's a video on Kasinga Day.
Welcome back to Africa Good Morning. Let's get into the news making headlines. UN Chief Guterres urges West African juntas to return to civilian rule. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged the military juntas in Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali to hand power back to civilian rule as soon as possible. Speaking after meeting Senegalese President Macky Sall in Dakar on Sunday, Guterres said they had agreed on the need to keep talking to the de facto authorities in all three countries so as to get a swift return to constitutional order. All three countries struggling with a jihadist insurgency in the Sahel region have recently experienced military coups in Mali in August 2020 and May 2021, Guinea in September 2021, and Burkina Faso in January 2022. Sall is the current chair of the West African Bloc ECOWAS, which has suspended all three countries from its membership. ECOWAS imposed heavy sanctions against Mali in January after the regime there rejected a rapid return to civilian rule.
Now, staying with one of the aforementioned Western African countries, Mali's junta breaks off from defense accords with France. Mali's junta announced on Monday it was breaking off from its defense accords with former colonial ruler France, condemning flagrant violations of its national sovereignty by the French troops there. Colonel Abdoulaye Maiga cited multiple instances of French forces having violated the country's airspace. He also referred to the June 2021 decision by France to end joint operations with Malian forces. Tensions between France and the junta in Mali, which seized power in August 2000, have been rising for some time. In February, France decided to pull out its troops after falling out with the military junta, particularly over its rapprochement with the Kremlin.
Police and protesters clashed during Eid celebration. Ethiopian police used tear gas and briefly clashed with young Muslims in the capital on Monday during prayers to mark the end of Ramadan. The Ethiopian capital saw scenes of panic on Monday. Police fired tear gas at Muslim protesters on the fringes of prayer marking the end of Ramadan. The incident occurred outside the Addis Ababa International Stadium, and the Addis police called it a riot caused by a few individuals. An official said a policeman unintentionally fired tear gas at the crowd when some faithful started to chant slogans and throw stones. The Addis police issued a statement saying property had been damaged before order was restored. This is one of our Eid celebration, our holiday. Annually, it comes every year, once a year, so I need to deliver a message for all Muslims to look after poor people, to help them, to work with others and Muslims with the government as well. The stadium was full for the Eid celebration that some worshippers gathered at the Meskel Square to pray.
Now, during a political campaign, generally the leader of a political party chooses a running mate, that is, and sometimes they become president and vice president, or the vice president is chosen by the president once he's seated. Now, when these two are not getting along, that is never a good sign for the leadership of a country, and that is the case in Kenya as tension rises between President Uhuru Kenyatta and his vice president. As Kenya's general elections are approaching, tension between President Uhuru Kenyatta and his vice president William Ruto is mounting. President Kenyatta has asked his deputy to resign, claiming he did not act enough for his country. Following this comment, Ruto tweeted back that the last cabinet meeting had been organized 2 years ago and encouraged his leader to call him. General elections are meant to happen next August, and 47 candidates have already joined the race. Kenyatta can no longer stand for re-election after 2 terms, but William Ruto is resenting him for backing Raila Odinga, a former prime minister, instead of him. The tussle even invited itself during the state funeral of former leader Mwai Kibaki last Friday, when the political opponents did not even shake hands. The president does not have the ability to get rid of his deputy, even if he wished, as he can only be removed through impeachment or incapacity.
Press freedom, the different facets of Africa. Press freedom has many facets in Africa, ranging from abundance of media outlets in Senegal and South Africa to the deafening silence of privately owned media in Eritrea and Djibouti. Despite a wave of liberalization in the 1990s, there are still too often cases of arbitrary censorship, especially on the internet, with occasional network shutdowns in some countries, arrest of journalists, and violent attacks. These usually go completely unpunished, as was the case with the 2016 disappearance of Malian journalist Birama Traoré, who was kidnapped by a Malian intelligence agency and most likely killed while secretly detained. In recent years, a wave of Ukrainian law criminalizing online journalism has dealt a new blow to the right to information. At the same time, the spread of rumors, propaganda, and disinformation has contributed to the undermining of journalism and access to quality information, often poorly supported by the government and still largely dependent on the editorial dictates their owners. African media outlets struggle to develop sustainable economic models. Nonetheless, the recent emergence of coalitions of investigative journalists has resulted in major revelations about the matters of public interest. Long suffocated by dictatorships, the media landscape has opened up to varying degrees in countries like Angola, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia, but in most cases, the repression of dissident journalism persists. Now we'll bring you more news after the break. Stay with us.
Africa Good Morning is a current affairs program that brings you the latest from Southern Africa and beyond. News, economics, sport, weather, interviews, and so much more. For any advertising or news-related queries, contact agm@synergy.com.na. Africa Good Morning, bringing Africa to you.
Thank you for staying with Africa. Good morning. Now, an unfortunate reoccurrence in Nigeria has been the collapsing of buildings, and it's been happening very randomly. 8 dead in 3-story building collapse. A 3-story residential building has collapsed in Lagos, Nigeria's largest city, killing at least 8 people, with many feared trapped, emergency response services said on Monday. Now, the cause of the collapse, which happened around 9:30 p.m. on Sunday, is yet to be established, according to the agency. The residential apartment building collapsed late Sunday night in the Oyingbo area of Lagos, Nigeria's commercial center and most populated city with more than 14 million people. Residents and passerbys gathered before dawn as they joined a team of emergency and aid workers who searched through the rubble in search of survivors. It is not clear how many occupants were in the apartment building, located in a densely populated area of the city.
In our next story, over 290 million COVID-19 vaccination administered across the continent. As of May the 2nd, 2022, confirmed cases of COVID-19 from 55 African countries reached over 11 million, while over 292 million vaccinations have been administered across the continent. Reported deaths in Africa reached 252,865, and over 9.6 million people have recovered. South Africa has the most reported cases of over 3.7 million, and over 100,000 people have died. The most affected countries are Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, as well as Kenya. The numbers are compiled by the Center for System Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University using statistics from the World Health Organization and other international institutions, as well as national and regional public health departments.
Now, in our next story, employers disregard trade unions as their partners. This is stemming from Namibia. Namibian Minister of Labour, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation, Utoni Nyoma, says not all employers view trade unions as their partners, and not all employers respect the dignity of their employees. The minister says not all employers respect the dignity of their employees or subscribe to the goals of decent work. A large percentage of Namibian workers are poorly paid and lack protection for their health and safety. Unemployment is threatening the future of our youth, he said. He added that the vestiges of discrimination on the basis of race, sex and disability, among others, persist in some sectors and some workplaces. I therefore strongly encourage Namibian workers to learn about the rights and protections guaranteed to them by our labor and employment laws, including the right to join trade unions, he said. If workers are able to engage with their employers through well-functioning democratic trade unions, they will achieve better wages, better conditions of employment, and an overall better standard of living, he said.
Ecotourism, 6 African countries among world top destinations. Global travel website Big 7 Travel shortlisted 50 countries worth exploring for wanderlust tourists conscious of their carbon footprint. White sand beaches as far as one can behold. Global travel website Big 7 Travel shortlisted 50 African countries worth exploring. Asian countries, Batoon comes first, but Africa shines on the podium. Botswana takes second place, and the Gambia was ranked third on the 2022 top eco-friendly places to visit. Tanzania is the third African country singled out. The East African nation takes 20th place. Cape Verde is ranked 43rd. Mauritius takes the last spot on the Big 7 Travel 22 ranking. Ecotourism is a form of tourism involving visiting fragile and relatively unspoiled natural areas in a way that benefits to local communities. This low-impact alternative to standard mass tourism has been gaining traction in the past few years. A 2021 report projected that the global ecotourism industry would generate over $300 billion in 2027. In 2019, the industry garnered $181.1 billion.
Now, in the last of our top stories, former Bok beast to put weight behind children's education as UNICEF ambassador. Former Springbok rugby player Tendai Beast Mtawarira has been appointed by UNICEF as a regional ambassador for Eastern and Southern Africa. Mtawarira, who was born in Zimbabwe but eventually settled in South Africa where he became a rugby legend, will now be able to use his voice to bring attention to UNICEF's humanitarian and development priorities in the Eastern and Southern Africa region. I believe education is the great equalizer, and every child on this continent should be able to access quality learning and fulfill their potential, Beast said. According to UNICEF, many families living in informal settlements in Kenya are struggling with lack of water and proper sanitation and providing for their children's basic needs. Mtawarira, who has his own The Beast Foundation to support children and youth through sport and education, collaborated with UNICEF in 2020 to produce a video titled Africa Song to mark the Day of the African Child. I have to say, Aina, being a rugby fan, it was difficult not reading that as Beast, because that's what the people say whenever he gets the rugby ball. But you are still on Africa Good Morning. We are 2 years from the beginning of COVID-19. What has been the impact on the economy? We'll be talking about that, or actually really looking at the thoughts and decimations of Mr. Theo Klein from Simona Storm after this break.
Adam Tas is coming to Windhoek to help build a brighter future for education. Join us at the Sounds of Caring concert at Windhoek High School Vegkop on 20 and 21 May, where he will be performing with Von Arends and Rian Smith. Tickets cost $200 Namibian and are available via eticket.my.na. All proceeds go towards the African Child Development Trust.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, billions of dollars and nearly 1 million COVID-19 tests later, Simonis Storm economist Theo Klein takes stock of Namibia 2 years after the first case of COVID-19 was reported in the country. Let's have a look.
Hello, Theo Klein, economist of Simone Storm. Theo, welcome once again to the studio. Your dedication to this program is rather unmatched, especially seeing that you are talking to us while you are at home with COVID.
Yes, hi, Jeremy. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I think it's funny that it has to happen now for the first time since the pandemic outbreak, but rather this more mild variant than Delta. So I count myself lucky, at least.
Theo, it's just about 2 years since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Namibia. How does the Namibia of 2020 compare to the Namibia of 2022?
There are quite a lot of similarities, Jeremy. I think, especially with regards to our dire economy, that is still not in a good space. So I do think that in that regard, we are fairly similar to 2020. However, it has been the first time our democratic government has handled a pandemic. And I think obviously quite a few mistakes have been made, but it seems as if we are willing to learn from them and try and shape a new strategy for future pandemics that should come our way. So I think that at least makes me hopeful. But we have a lot more jobs that need to be created than ever before, especially compared to 2020. I think the challenges are ever greater. We are sitting with a new world order where a lot of fears of social unrest with regards to the COVID policies are looming. Inflation is rife all over the world. And I think so for Namibia, we find ourselves in a very challenging position with a lot more jobs than we have to create if we are to really improve things in our society. to avoid social unrest. So 2 years after every epidemic, we have seen social unrest in countries that had virus outbreaks. So it remains to be seen whether Namibia can successfully avoid so major social unrest locally. It remains to be seen.
The verdict is still out.
Yeah.
Theo, what are the major scars left on Namibia by COVID?
I think for those who have lost their jobs as a result of the lockdown and our borders being closed, I think the scars are still very much fresh or alive. And especially if we look at sectors such as the tourism industry, we also know of a lot of small and medium-sized manufacturers that have closed as a result of the lockdown. So I think for them, the scars are still very much alive. I don't know how those families are coping financially, because we are sitting with very high food and fuel prices, rising interest rates. And if they've not been able to replace their lost jobs, then of course they are sitting in a very difficult financial position at the moment. I think also we are social beings, and I've said it many times before, we are not supposed to be locked away and kept isolated from one another. So I think for those who have developed mental health disorders as a result of the lockdown, for them, the scars are also still very much fresh. And I think that obviously has impacts on our economy, because it impacts labor productivity. And for those who have lost all sense of hope and all sense of purpose, that can also filter through to the economy in the form of them not trying to even find a new job. So then they become what we economists call discouraged work seekers. And then you need a welfare systems where government then, has unemployment benefits to sort of keep them alive or keep them going. And that's also a problem. And I think it's just overall, if you have mental health disorders, it does affect your productivity. No matter in which sector you operate. So I think there are those social issues that we also still sit with, and that obviously needs to be addressed. And I'm hoping that obviously that will also shape our strategy of how we tackle future pandemics.
Theo, I just want to elaborate on this point in particular around the mental health of Namibia and its labor force nearly post-pandemic. It's very difficult to really get the entire picture, because we don't really have data, and there's a lot of red tape getting that data. But in your experience, you have spoken to experts. How bad is it?
I would say, look, without the data, it's still difficult to say, but the responses I've received, Jeremy, say that it is significant. So I've spoken to both psychiatric or health practitioners in both private and public sectors. And they indicate that the problem has gotten significantly worse. It's not just with regards to mental health disorders, where the most common one was depression, which they've seen a significant increase of, also suicide, but then it's also social issues such as drug and alcohol abuse. So I guess that maybe also supports why government put restrictions in place in terms of alcohol sales since the pandemic outbreak, but it remains a big problem. And I think also now with food and fuel prices having increased significantly, overall inflation is much higher. I think for those households, it becomes a bigger problem, because if you have more and more money going towards alcohol and drugs, maybe the father or the mother that's abusing it, then of course there's ever less money available for basic necessities. So I think those households will see a much bigger or more negative socioeconomic situation for themselves. And then I think with regards to the mental health, I know that when I spoke to public healthcare workers, they just said that there's no more capacity in the public healthcare space for more patients. So now they are in a situation where certain citizens are in need of being admitted to certain psychiatric healthcare facilities, but there's not enough space for them. And of course, they can't afford the private facilities. So so that's actually a much bigger problem within the public sector space. And it remains concerning that there are a lot of Namibians across the country that are not receiving the necessary mental health care that they should be receiving. And this problem, Jo Marie, I understand, is not just focused on certain big urban sectors or centers such as Windhoek and Swakop. It is across the country as well, especially in the north. There is also seemingly a big problem with regards to this as well.
Thank you for staying with Africa. Good morning. Right now, we're crossing over to Zambia to have a chat with Mike Sichula about the news stories on the ground. Good morning, Mike.
Africa, good morning. I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
We are fantastic. Now, Mike, close to 100,000 COVID vaccines have gone to waste in Zambia. Could you tell us about this just before you talk to us about Zambian journalists yesterday commemorating World Press Freedom Day?
Yes, indeed. Quite a sad state of affairs where, as the global community is fighting COVID-19, from the Zambian setup, with the target that the government has set to vaccinate close to 70% by mid-year this year, that has not been achieved so far because the numbers are below 40% of people that have been vaccinated. Now, the sad part to this whole thing is that close to 900,000 COVID vaccines have gone to waste. The reason is that people are not turning up to get vaccinated. This is something that the Ministry of Health is very concerned, despite increasing awareness on the benefits of COVID vaccines. People still do not want to turn up and get vaccinated, which is something that the ministry says they want to increase. Then another sad part of it is that since the beginning of the pandemic, 300 health workers have died from COVID, which is a very sad state of affairs.
Indeed. Sorry to rush you, Mike, but we are going to need to be a little pragmatic with the stories. Do continue with your story about World Press Freedom Day.
Yes, so the other issue, like moving on to another story, is that yesterday Zambian journalists across the country joined the rest of the global community to commemorate World Press Freedom Day under the theme Journalism Under Surveillance, which was something that media bodies said needs to be embraced because digital journalism is there and there's just a need to coexist. So from the Zambian setup today, President Hakainde Hichilema is going to officially officiate at this commemoration of World Press Freedom Day, where media awards will be given to deserving media journalists across the country, which is something that never used to happen in the past. So because of commitments, yesterday the president could not be in attendance, but today is going to be in attendance.
All right.
All right, we understand that the Zambian government has denied the allegations of having any intentions to establish a military base in her soil. And can you also touch on your final story where the Chipolopolo Queens have intensified preparation ahead of the upcoming Africa Women's Cup?
According to the Minister of Defense, Ambrose Rufuma, he says Zambia has got no intention of establishing or housing any military bases on the soil through the U.S. African Command, which is AFRICOM. Mr. Rufuma says, contrary to assertions, the office being created is one for security cooperation, which will be based at the U.S. Embassy in Lusaka. He says the office with the Zambian Defense Force is meant to enhance security to military relationship, extend areas of cooperation in force, and not a military base, as it has been said by other sections of society. So the government has said there's nothing of establishing a military base. Then moving on to Marai's story, which is the sports, the Chiporopolo, the Copper Queens have continued preparing for the Morocco Africa Cup of Nations. So what has been happening is that Botswana has come into Zambia, and in the last 2 weeks, the two nations have battled it out in two friendlies. The Chiporopolo came out tops in the first match; they won 1-0. Then in the second match, the two teams drew 1-0. So this is an ongoing preparation ahead of the Morocco 2022 Africa Cup of Nations for Women. That kicks off on June 2nd. So Zambia has been drawn in to be alongside Cameroon, Tunisia, and Togo for the 2022 Africa Cup of Nations for Women. So this is an ongoing preparations, and Botswana is here to, which is also qualified, is here to help Zambia prepare for the Africa Cup of Nations for Women.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike, for bringing us the news stories from Zambia. We certainly hope you commemorated World Press Freedom Day in a befitting manner.
Thank you very much, Africa. Good morning. All the very best to all the journalists, even in Namibia there. Thank you very much.
Indeed, more freedom and more safety for journalists around the world. Right now, we're not going to talk about the world. We're going to talk about Southern Africa, specifically the weather. Up next.
Welcome back. Now, Africa Good Morning is proud to bring you news from across Africa, but right now we particularly visit South Africa, where Ari Houhad has the news on the ground. Good morning, Ari. How are you?
Yes, very good morning, Aina, and also Ashwin. Yes, nice to talk to you this morning.
All right, let's get into our first story. Consumers in South Africa face another heavy price increase in paraffin and diesel as from today, while petrol was lowered with 12 cents.
Yes, there's a bit of help on the petrol side. We know about the temporary cut in fuel levies in South Africa for a few months. That does help, but diesel goes up 98 cents. That's on the 0.05% sulfate. And the big challenge, I think, for Southern Africans is not maybe the diesel, but it is a challenge. But the paraffin, the paraffin is going up by 79.60 cents. So that is quite a big amount that it goes up per litre. On average, about South Africans consume about 5 litres of paraffin weekly. So that's a massive amount of paraffin that is consumed and used in South Africa. So Obviously, the changes is still related to the Brent crude oil and the rand dollar, etc., etc. We know the reasons, but at least for the petrol price, there's levy cuts for a few months. The levies at the moment is £2.44 for petrol and £2.30 for diesel. So there's a bit of help from government.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. Now, after President Cyril Ramaphosa was not allowed to speak to workers on Workers' Day in Rustenburg, he made some remarks. Could you please get into that?
Yes, he mentioned that he thought that it is more to do with the unions not having control and not being able to address the challenges. But he also agreed that politicians also have a challenge like that. I think it wasn't a personal thing. I think the reports I've read wasn't that they didn't want to hear him speak. It's just that they're very desperate at the moment. And it's linked to that Sibanya-Stillwater mine dispute. That is mainly what happened in Rustenburg, and it's still ongoing. It's in its 7th week. And it's the unions asking for 1,100 annual increase in salaries. The mine's offering 850. That was on the back of, we reported a week or two ago, of the CEO earning quite a few million, 300 million in the year. So it is a frustration of the workers, and I think it's spilled over into that. That was the platform they used and said that we've had enough. We don't want to listen to speeches, address our challenges.
All right, please tell us about the gang violences that are escalating.
Gang violence is always a bit of an issue in Southern Africa or in Western Cape. There is the escalation, but the challenge is inter-Cape buses, the bus there in view. There's been attacks on the buses, especially in the Eastern Cape routes, and also it happened in the Western Cape. There was unfortunately one bus driver that was shot dead. It is the CEO of Inter-Cape came out overnight as well. He said that there's been threats against them from taxi unions asking him for millions of rands to protect the buses from stone throwing in the Eastern Cape. So that's extortion, basically. So that's Road Taxi Association. So it is a big challenge for the bus industry. Obviously, rival taxi unions don't like the buses that are traveling, so they want protection. And Intercape say they're not going to pay that million.
All right. Now, Ari, could you talk about KwaZulu-Natal health authorities being concerned about the rising COVID-19 infections? And just after that, please get into our feel-good story about the Springbok rugby team for the first time ever playing a rugby test at the Adelaide Oval against Australia.
Yes, Ashwin, briefly, the COVID-19 is a reality still around us. There is an increase in cases at the last 24 hours, 3,785 new cases in South Africa. That's a 17.6% infection rate. There's a spike in KwaZulu-Natal. They say if there's a 10% increase in cases over 7 days moving average, it triggers an alert. A 20% increase is a resurgence, so it's getting closer to that in that area. It's above 1,000 per day. So the health department looking after that. Briefly, Adelaide Oval, yes, it's known for cricket. South Africa has played many cricket tests there. So it's not often that you play rugby on the cricket oval. It's around, it's oval. But it will happen on the 27th of August, first test ever. South Africa, the Springboks play Australia 27 August and 3 September. After that, the second test. So that is good news for South Africa. At least they're on the field again, and they will play in a cricket stadium. Hopefully they don't get a cricket score against them.
Hopefully they don't indeed. Thank you, Ari, for bringing us the news stories from South Africa.
Great talking, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Bye.
All right, we certainly hope to have a great day. Now, Nigerian workers are struggling as their cost of living is outstripping their incomes. We'll be talking about that in economic news after the break.
You're still watching Africa Good Morning. Now let's get into our economic news. Nigerian workers struggle as cost of living outstrips income. Food inflation in Nigeria increased by 15% during the 11 month from April 2021 to March 2022, adding pressure on the cost of living for salary earners whose income have not risen for close to 3 years. The alarming situation is that the $72 minimum wage is insufficient to meet the value of basic foodstuff for the healthy living of an adult in a month, let alone an entire family. In January 2022, the price of essential foodstuff requirement for one adult stood at $98, which is about 37% higher than the minimum wage. Households reduce the amount of food purchased, which will ultimately result in a drop in a total calorie intake. Households may also shift spending from expensive staples to cheaper ones, so the so-called substitution effect. Recent interviews and focus group discussion with Nigerian workers confirm the findings of previous studies. These interviews and focus group discussions are part of my ongoing analysis of food prices volatility in Nigeria.
In our next story, the Guptas catapulted Molefe and Singh into Eskom. The Guptas were instrumental in having Brian Molefe and Anuj Singh appointed as CEO and CFO of Eskom respectively, paving the way for the Guptas to take over Glencore's coal mining assets in South Africa, according to the 4th Zondo report. Assisting the Guptas was then Minister of Public Enterprises Lynn Brown, as well as the complaint remnant of the Eskom board that hadn't been axed, Dr. Ben Ngubane, who was also doing whatever the Guptas wanted him to do, was appointed Eskom chair. Then President Jacob Zuma was their man. Those who resisted wrongdoing, like former Eskom CEO Shediso Matona and board members Shololefo Molefe and Dan Marokane, had been axed. In a nutshell, substantial monies were misappropriated from Eskom to enable the Guptas to purchase Glencore's SA coal interests. The Guptas' acquisition of OCH and OCM would not have been possible without the active support of Zuma, Brown, Zwane, Molefe, Singh, Koko, and a number of accomplices.
In our next story, mountain of repairs to be made, Toyota SA CEO. Toyota South Africa Motors indicated on Friday that it is still unable to confirm when production will resume at its plant following extensive damage caused by the recent floods in KwaZulu-Natal. Production at the Prospect plant south of Durban has been suspended since the 11th of April. TSAM said it is currently implementing a systematic and meticulous phased plan to return its plant to working conditions after suffering extensive flood damage 2 weeks ago. This approach is designed to ensure a safer start-up without any potential secondary issues. TSAM said that once the trial power stage is reached, certain areas of the facility will then be able to be moved to phase 4, which involves an accurate assessment and equipment check.
All right, mining bosses rake in hundreds of millions. 2 announcements from JSE-listed mining companies in the last week have revealed how just 4 executive directors, 2 CEOs, a CFO, and a COO will receive in excess of 700 million rand in guaranteed compensation for last year. Now, almost half of this figure, or an astonishing 300.3 million, was the total remuneration for Sibanye-Stillwater CEO Neil Froneman for last year. The bulk of this was in the form of conditional share awards made to the gold, platinum, and lithium miners' top employee. This includes adjustments for accruals not settled, those settled in the year, as well as movements of those in the year. Excluding all of these, Froneman's total single-figure remuneration for the year was 291.6 million. By comparison, his total package was just 62.7 million rand in 2020, which included 21.3 million rand in conditional share awards. CFO of Sibanye Stillwater, Charles Keita, had remuneration totaling 147.2 million rand last year. A full 87% of this comprised conditional share awards. Keita had total remuneration of 30.9 million rand in 2020.
Those have been our stories, so let's have a look at our economic indicators. Welcome back to Africa. Good morning. Now, as always, here is Ari Khogad with today's international sports package.
Good day, everyone. Time for international sport, and starting off with soccer news. And it was a midweek game that was played in the English Premier League. That was Manchester United that hosted Brentford. That was played at Old Trafford at the home ground of Manchester United. And quite a convincing win for Man United. They beat them by 3-0. Still, Manchester United sit in number 6, the sixth position of the English Premier League log, and that is way outside the top 4. That is quite lucrative and also prestigious to play in the UEFA Champions League next year. It's going to be tough to get into the top 4 at the moment because Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur are both doing well. At the moment, Man United do have 58 points, and at the 5th position, it is Tottenham Hotspur on 61 points, and then 63 points for Arsenal in the 4th position. The challenge for Manchester United is that both Tottenham Hotspur and Arsenal have played 2 less games than Manchester United. Manchester United, their next game will be against Brighton. That's an away game on Saturday. And more soccer news is that UEFA announced that there's further sanction against Russia, and that comes in the form that Russia will be barred from competing in this year's Women's Euro 2022 tournament. And then also Russian clubs have been banned from UEFA competitions. That's all the competitions effective next year. And also Russia won't be allowed to bid for the 2028 Euro competition to host that. On to some Formula 1 racing news, and it is the next Formula 1 race will take place this coming Saturday. That's the Miami Grand Prix in the USA. But news from Formula 1 is that it's announced that Porsche and Audi seems to be set to enter the Formula 1 racing. Not sure what year it will be, in the next year or two. And Volkswagen, the owner of Porsche and Audi, the brands, they have confirmed this move. It seems like the plan is for Porsche to have alliance with the Red Bull racing team, and it seems like Audi is set to buy out an existing team. And now for further international sport news, we go to tennis news, and it is the Madrid Open that's being played at the moment. The women's section, or the women's side of the tournament, already started last week. The men started this week. And let's start with the women, and it is Simone Halep of Romania that's through to the quarterfinals, and she beat Coco Gauff, the 18-year-old from the USA. She beat her in 6-4 and 6-4. So Simone Halep, she's doing well on clay again. She was out for quite a while, but she won the 2018 French Open, so she will be competing again, be a strong contender later this month at the French Open. In the quarterfinals, she'll be playing against Ons Jabeur, and Ons Jabeur is the 8th seed, and she's from Tunisia. In the men's draw, it is Andy Murray of Britain that won a high-profile first-round game. He played against Dominic Thiem. Dominic Thiem, also a 2020 US Open winner, and it was Andy Murray that won that game 6-3 and 6-4. Dominic Thiem also been out quite a few months because of injury and just made his comeback now. And it is Andy Murray that will next play Canadian Denis Shapovalov. He is from Canada. Shapovalov, he beat Hugo Humbert from France, and that score was 7-6 and 6-3. The first seed in the men's section will be Novak Djokovic, and he will be in action in the round of 32. And let's conclude today's international sports news with cycling news, and it is news from the Tour de France that will take place from the 1st to the 24th of July in France, of course, and that is that Mark Cavendish of Britain will probably not be cycling in this year's Tour de France, and that is unlikely to cycle because of his team Quickstep Alpha, that they're looking at the Dutch sprinter Fabio Jacobsen to be their preferred sprinter. So the 36-year-old Cavendish, he last year equaled the record of Eddy Merckx. That was 34 stage wins in the history of the Tour de France, and he equaled that record when he had 4 stage wins in the 2021 Tour de France. So it's tough. It's bad news for Mark Cavendish, one of the best sprinters in cycling, but he's getting a bit older, 36 years old. So we'll see. Maybe he can still find a way to get into the Tour de France that will start the 1st of July and finish the 24th of July. So that's the international sports news for now. Hope you have a great day, and we talk again tomorrow. Goodbye.
Thank you for staying with Africa Good Morning, as we have been bringing you the pertinent stories stemming from the African continent and beyond. Let's have a look at the highlights from today's top stories. UN Chief Guterres urges West African juntas to return to civilian rule. Mali's junta breaks off from defense accords with France. Police and protesters clash during Eid celebrations. Tension rises between President Kenyatta and his vice president. Nigerian workers struggle as cost of living outstrips incomes. Manchester United limps back to winning ways. Those have been our stories.
Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Africa Good Morning. Please do remember that we do broadcast AGM on DSTV channel 285 as well as GoTV channel 94. We also welcome your remarks regarding our show. You can post them on our Facebook and Twitter pages. That is at Africa Good Morning. From all of us here in studio is all our love, all our light.
Swera Jaganaka.